Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating look at an ancient text, John chapter 21. But, this isn't just some dry history lesson. We're actually exploring a super universal human struggle. We're talking about the seemingly impossible task of avoiding distractions, dodging that dreaded comparison trap, and keeping our focus locked onto what truly matters. If you've ever felt completely sidetracked by looking at what someone else is doing, well, you are absolutely going to love the insights we have lined up for you today.
So let's kick things off with a pretty compelling metaphor straight from our source material. Why is there a thick painted line at the bottom of an Olympic swimming pool? Think about it. If you've ever watched a swim meet or even just stared down into a standard lap pool, you've probably noticed those thick, dark painted lines right down the middle of every single lane. Now, you might think they're just there to mark the lanes or maybe just for decoration, right? But they actually serve a highly specific functional purpose. It's actually all about the physics of the water. Swimmers use those painted lines to stay perfectly aligned with their goal. When you're swimming competitively, your body needs to remain totally streamlined, and the physics of it are pretty unforgiving. The exact moment a swimmer turns their head to check on the competition in the next lane over, it fundamentally changes how the water flows around their body. It increases resistance, it slows them down, and almost inevitably, it causes them to veer right off course. So to win, or honestly, even just to swim efficiently at all, a swimmer has to keep their eyes fixed on that line straight ahead.
That brings us to Section 1, Peter's immediate distraction.
You see, this whole swimming pool phenomenon perfectly mirrors an ancient story found in John chapter 21. The context here is absolutely monumental. Jesus is just resurrected, and he's giving his final, incredibly vital instructions to his disciples. Now, you'd think that at a moment like this, everyone would be laser-focused, right? But human nature has this funny way of interrupting even the most profound moments. The passage tells us that the very last command Jesus gave to his disciple Peter in verse 19 was incredibly simple, profound, and direct. He just said, "Follow me." That's the goal. That's the painted line at the bottom of the pool. Just look forward and follow.
But just like a distracted swimmer, what does Peter do? Our source points out this really amazing detail about the original Greek text. So there are no chapter or verse breaks originally, meaning immediately after Jesus says, "Follow me," the very next words, the first two words of verse 20 are, "Peter turned." Instantly, he takes his eyes right off his goal, completely ignores the straight line, and looks around.
Instead of just moving forward, Peter literally points at another disciple, John, and starts sizing up his own situation. He essentially asks Jesus, "Lord, what about this guy? Like, what kind of treatment is he going to get?" Peter has literally just been handed his unique, profound life assignment, and within seconds, he's completely sidetracked, wondering what his friend's assignment is going to be.
Moving right along to Section 2, Loved Before We Follow.
Now, before we get to Jesus' brilliantly sharp response to Peter's distraction, our source highlights a super crucial foundation here. Because to understand why we get distracted in the first place, we kind of have to understand what fuels our focus. Notice how John, the author of the text, describes himself. When Peter turns to look at him, John doesn't use his given name. He doesn't list out his achievements or his credentials or his resume. Instead, he identifies entirely by Christ's affection for him, calling himself the disciple whom Jesus loved.
This is a massive paradigm shift. As our source notes, if you go up and ask modern Christians who they are, they'll likely give you side A. They'll say, "I'm a believer," or "I am a Christ follower." And hey, while those are perfectly good, true statements, they focus entirely on what the individual has done. It all relies on personal effort. Side B, which is John's approach, centers his entire identity around what has been done for him. Jesus loved him first. That prior, anchoring affection is the actual fuel required to have the strength to follow. It's like you don't follow to earn the love is what actually gives you the power to follow.
Which leads us to Section 3, the comparison trap.
When we lose sight of that foundational anchoring love, we basically run out of fuel. And when we run out of fuel, we start looking around and fall straight into this exact trap, especially today in our modern social media age. Let's break it down. Step 1, we take our eyes off our own unique path. Step 2, we start scrolling through heavily edited, #blessed photos of other people's lives. You know the ones, their perfect vacations, their flawless families. And then step 3 is where the trap snaps shut. This comparison breeds one of two things. Either crippling jealousy because you feel like someone has it way easier than you, or a Pharisee-like superiority because you think you're working harder or suffering more nobly than they are. Either way, step 4 is inevitable. You veer completely off your assigned course.
Let's look at Section 4, running your assigned race.
To keep Peter from falling headfirst into this trap, Jesus doesn't offer him a warm, comforting hug. No, instead, he shuts the comparison down with a pretty sharp correction. Because sometimes the absolute most loving thing you can receive is a blunt warning to just stay in your own lane. His response to Peter's "what about him?" is basically, "What is that to you? You follow me." He's telling him it is absolutely none of your business what happens to John. Your only job is simply to follow.
And this brilliantly illustrates the extreme differences in the paths God assigns. Jesus blatantly juxtaposes Peter's future, which we know from history involves intense suffering and martyrdom by crucifixion, against John's eventual path. John actually gets a long life and retires on Patmos, which is a beautiful Greek island. I mean, talk about a disparity in retirement plans, right? It was literally the cross versus a tropical island. Jesus sets up this extreme tension to prove a vital point. The assignments are vastly different for sure, but the master calling the shots is the exact same.
The speaker from our source uses a really great analogy to explain this. Imagine you're walking through a big market. There are mass-produced items everywhere you look, but set off to the side, carefully guarded, are the expensive, handmade items. They're highly valued precisely because they are custom-made. In the same way, God has crafted a totally unique, custom-made path for your life, for your family, and even for your organization. You literally cannot effectively run someone else's race, and you really shouldn't try to trade your handcrafted assignment with anyone else's.
And finally, Section 5, Resting in Sufficiency. As the passage wraps up, there was this wild rumor spreading around that John was never going to die. But John purposefully writes to shut this rumor down and shift the spotlight right back to the absolute sufficiency of Jesus. He doesn't appeal to external organizations, human institutions, or his own elevated celebrity status to prove that his writings are true. Instead, he trusts in what theologians call the internal testimony of the Spirit, which is really just the idea that the Bible authenticates itself to the believer. We don't need a famous speaker or some trending celebrity to validate the path. The text itself is the ultimate authority guiding us. It is that steady, unchanging, painted black line at the bottom of the pool.
To prove that we have exactly what we need to stay focused, John finishes up with a magnificent use of hyperbole in verse 25. He states that if everything Jesus did were written down, the whole world could not contain the books. He's basically saying, look, I didn't write down every single little detail, but I wrote down enough. What you have is completely sufficient for your journey. You aren't missing out on some secret knowledge that the swimmer in the next lane possesses.
So, the crucial point here is summarized beautifully by the source in these three specific takeaways. 1. Anchor your identity entirely in His love, because that is your fuel. 2. Stop looking at the other swimmers' lanes, just run the custom-made race designed specifically for you. And 3. Rest easy knowing His completed work and His given word are completely sufficient for your entire journey.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this thought. The very next time you feel that urge to pull out your phone and measure your chaotic behind-the-scenes reality against someone else's perfectly polished highlight reel, stop and ask yourself, are you exhausting yourself just drowning in the resistance of someone else's lane? Or are you brave enough to swim the terrifying, beautiful, custom-made path painted uniquely for you? Keep your eyes forward. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and keep exploring.